Hey, and welcome to the 2-time Good Fighter Guide to Feral PVE DPS in patch 4.01. At the beginning of this video, I have placed a table of contents listed by time and topic so that you can use this guide as a reference without having to scan around for info that you want. I'm going to include a little bit of everything so players completely new to Feral or even veterans can get something out of this. Let's get started with talents. In the interest of saving time, I'm only going to cover talents that are debatable or potentially confusing. I'm also going to cover what not to get. Each horizontal row in a talent tree is referred to as a tier. They go from top to bottom and 1 through 7. As you can see in my example talents, all of tier 1 is filled with points. Tier 2, however, has 0 points in the Fury Swipes option. In tier 1, I highly recommend getting Feral Swiftness. This movement speed increase isn't a direct DPS gain, but the ability to get across long distances faster helps prevent target changes from turning into time away from doing damage. Some people would argue that Furor is a waste of points in PvE, but I find that making good use of all of your abilities requires shifting into other forms, and once you go back into Cap form, having more energy equals more better. Infected Wounds is another situational talent. I can say that in Cataclysm raiding, I have already made use of the ability to slow targets using Mangle and Shred with this talent. The reduction in attack speed component of this talent makes it nice for those times where no one else in the group is putting up a similar debuff. Fury Swipes isn't a terrible option if you have points to spare, but I found the damage bonus from this talent to be unimpressive even with raid level weaponry. It is possible that this talent will improve in later patches as gear scales to provide us with better stats. Regarding Stampede as a PvE talent, here is where I stand. Everyone should be getting Feral Charge. The mobility of this spell is amazing. Aside from the fact that it gets you across the room much faster than walking, it also takes you up and over harmful effects on the ground. With Stampede, once you land, you can get at least one free combo point on your new target. Stampede also leads to a more powerful opening sequence, as I'll talk about later. Thick Hide is really meant for Feral Bear tanks. Don't get this unless you're really having to change into bear form a lot to save the day. Brutal Impact is probably less useful if you're part of a 25-man raiding group. There will likely be other people assigned to interrupts. In a 10-man raiding group, as well as in heroics, having your Skull Bash interrupt on a 10-second cooldown is unbeatable. At first you might be thinking, I'm not going to be healing, why should I get Nurturing Instinct? Aside from the fact that it makes life a little bit easier on your healers, I've actually found this talent to be immensely useful when casting Tranquility during times of heavy raid damage. Mathematically, Primal Madness isn't a huge DPS increase, even less than what you'd gain by getting Fury Swipes. I recommend avoiding this unless you plan to do some PvP on the side and you favor having a little bit more energy for burst. Survival Instincts is another talent that your healers will thank you for. You'll also be happy on the occasion that death seems imminent and your life is saved by this talent. Natural Reaction is only beneficial in bear form. That means don't get it unless you're a tank. Pulverize is only beneficial in bear form, and by now I think you know what that means. Everything else in tier 6 and 7 is worth getting and should not be skipped. In the Restoration tree, you want to pick up Natural Shapeshifter. This talent doesn't seem very useful by itself, but its real power is that it lets you get Master Shapeshifter in tier 2. Heart of the Wild increases your attack power by 10%. This increases the damage done by the majority of your abilities by 10%. This is major, not optional. The rest of the abilities in tier 1 are not worth getting and should be left out. Master Shapeshifter gives you 4% crit strike chance. 1 point for 4% crit? Do it. The only other talent that might be worth getting in tier 2 is Perseverance. The reduction in damage isn't as high as some of the other damage reduction talents, so you should only get this if you have some points to throw around or if you find yourself desperately needing to mitigate some magical damage. The prime glyphs I recommend are Rip, Shred, and Tiger's Fury. Your bleeds are your top damage, and buffing Rip is a huge DPS increase. That said, what could be better than having Shred, your primary filler, extend Rip's remaining duration by 2 seconds 3 times? Nothing. I personally prefer Tiger's Fury because this comes in handy quite a bit more often for me than having Berserk extended. The major glyphs I recommend are Entangling Roots, Feral Charge, and Rebirth. Depending on your situation, Entangling Roots might not be good for you. Later in the video, I'll talk a little bit about how you can make this spell invaluable. Reducing the cooldown of Feral Charge might not seem that great, but once you really get used to using Feral Charge, you'll wish it was off cooldown 2 seconds sooner. Glyph of Rebirth makes your Rebirth spell amazing. If your druid without this glyph uses Rebirth, there is an increased chance that the resurrected target will just end up dying again immediately. The only minor glyphs that are even useful for feral cats are Dash, Unburdened Rebirth, and Mark of the Wild. More dash is more better, enough said. Unburdened Rebirth means that you'll never get caught with your mats down when someone calls for a rebirth. Remember that guy that you just cast Rebirth on? Well, Glyph of Mark of the Wild will let you give them that buff again without killing your mana. There are 2 glyphs that you can use alternatively that are both still very good choices. You can replace Glyph of Tiger's Fury for Glyph of Berserk. The only reason I don't use this glyph is that it can often be hard in Cataclysm to make full uninterrupted use of your Berserk ability. You can also replace Glyph of Entangling Roots or Glyph of Feral Charge with Glyph of Fairy Fire. I leave this off because I Fairy Fire on the way in to attack a target with enough time to not let the global cooldown get in the way. All of these things are pretty closely tied together. I'm going to hit just the most basic suggestions. More in-depth information can be found online. At the end of this guide, I'll give you some resources for further info. Hit is your #1 stat until you reach the 8% hit cap. This will ensure your attacks do not miss as long as you remain behind your target. After this, Agility is your best stat, which provides 2 attack power per point, as well as a small amount of critical strike. Agility is such a strong stat for us that you won't be gemming or enchanting for anything else if you can avoid it. Mastery buffs your bleeds by a large amount, and with bleeds being your top damaging moves, Mastery is an amazing stat. Mastery is so far ahead of crit, hit after cap, expertise, and haste that if you have to gem for something other than pure agility, it will include Mastery as the secondary stat. At this time, you cannot get enough crit or haste from gear to make it worth going out of your way to get. Expertise is useful for ferals, but not as useful as it is for other classes. If you do find yourself in front of a target, no amount of expertise will make up for the loss of being able to shred, especially with the Glyph of Rip and Shred in use. You will want to gem all your slots for agility, except for whatever gems you need to fulfill your meta. The one case where gemming to fulfill a Sokka bonus is acceptable is if the bonus is 15 agility if you're primarily using green quality gems, or 20 agility if you're using primarily blue quality gems. Right now there are no outstanding metas for Feral, though this should be changing very soon in patch 4.06. Reforging can be a tricky thing to keep track of. Remember that items cannot be reforged for agility or have their agility changed to another stat. Items also cannot be reforged for a stat that they already have. When an item has been reforged, it will say so near the top of the item's tooltip. A reforged item will also list the stat that has been gained via reforging as the bottom stat. Try to never reforge Mastery to hit if you can avoid it. Mastery is that valuable. Reforge crit, hit after cap, expertise, and haste for Mastery once you're at 8% hit. As much as it's a cop-out of sorts, I'm not going to list all of the available best in slot enchants. There are lists online that cover this. If you follow the stat priority that I've laid out, you'll be in good shape. Your most fundamental abilities start with Mangle. Mangle puts up a debuff on your target that increases bleed damage by 30%. Without this debuff on your target, your total damage will plummet. Mangle is also your filler if you can't get behind your target to use Shred. Rake is one of your 2 high damage bleeds. It should always be on your target. Shred is your primary filler attack. Use this to generate combo points. You must be behind your target in order to shred. Shred can also be used from the side of your target if you are towards the back end. Always try to have the Mangle debuff on your target before you shred, as this will increase Shred's damage greatly. Fairy Fire is a debuff you'll place on your target to reduce their armor by 12%. This should be one of the first things to put on your target. Skull Bash is one of our new abilities that came with patch 4.01. You can Skull Bash any target within 13 yards, which will interrupt their spell casting. Skull Bash is also like a mini charge ability in the way that it will rush you towards your target. Blizzard clearly expects players to interrupt many things in Cataclysm, so get comfortable with your Skull Bash ASAP. Swipe's damage has been reduced from what it was in Wrath of the Lich King. I recommend avoiding the use of Swipe unless there are 6 or more targets in range. Swipe affects a half circle area immediately in front of you. One way to visualize this area is to put your arms outstretched to your sides and then bring them in front of you. This is the shape of the area that swipe hits. You also do not need to target anything in order to swipe. Rip is the other high damage bleed along with Rake. You'll want to apply this to your target ASAP. For long fights, you'll want 5 combo points before using this, since each point increases the total damage of Rip. When dealing damage to multiple targets, 5 combo points isn't necessary, as I'll discuss later. Savage Roar has been changed in Cataclysm. In Wrath of the Lich King, it was necessary to keep this buff on yourself 100% of the time. In Cataclysm, Savage Roar is still a good buff, but you can apply Rip first. It is optimal to have Savage Roar up with as many combo points as possible, but not game breaking. Savage Roar is also a good move to use just before switching targets if Rip is already applied. Ferocious Bite should only be used if Rip and Savage Roar are already applied to your target and will be up long enough for you to regenerate 5 combo points before Rip falls off. The exception to this is if the target is at or below 25% health, since 5 combo point Ferocious Bites will refresh Rip to its full duration with the Blood in the Water talent. Maim is hardly ever used in PvE, but I recommend keeping it on your bars just in case. Tiger's Fury is your most important cooldown. Aside from increasing physical damage done for 6 seconds, it also grants you 60 energy with the King of the Jungle talent. The best use of Tiger's Fury is once you've spent all your energy but need to generate combo points fast. You will use this the moment it comes off cooldown nearly every time. Berserk is a fantastic damage burst cooldown. In Cataclysm, it's becoming harder and harder to find situations where you'll be holding still long enough to make 100% efficient use of this talent, but it's still a very powerful one. You cannot use Tiger's Fury while under the effect of Berserk, but you can use Tiger's Fury to get full energy just before using Berserk. However, it is generally considered optimal to avoid using Tiger's Fury just before Berserk. Blizzard has heard our cries, and with Cataclysm they have greatly improved Cower. Cower reduces your threat on your current target by an amazing 10%. This cooldown gets stronger and stronger as the fight goes on, and is often essential in avoiding passing a tank on threat in the earlier parts of a fight. Feral Charge is a great gap closer. It's great for jumping over harmful effects and allows you to ravage for free after you use it. Dash is a huge mobility boost for a whopping 15 seconds. You can use it while stealth to keep up with a tank going towards a boss before you Feral Charge in. Pounce is a great ability to open with to help mitigate some damage as well as provide a bleed. Ravage is great after a Feral Charge, but you already know that. Rebirth is one of the best spells a druid brings to the table. Make sure you have both glyphs for this spell. Put it on your bar, live it, love it. Here's an example of a single target rotation. Things get moving quickly. Within 15 or 20 seconds, everything's going. You start out stealth. You're going to charge in, Fairy Fire, and then you're going to Ravage. Hit the Mangle, hit the Rake. Now you got enough points to Rip. Shred for combo points. Once you run out of energy, you're going to hit Tiger's Fury and Berserk. Get Savage Roar up. You're getting more combo points up as quickly as you possibly can. Rake's about to fall off, you'll put it back up. Get into full, there's a Ferocious Bite. That's your 20 seconds. Starts off pretty quick. The chore then becomes keeping up all the buffs and debuffs. My suggested rotation on multiple targets is really quite simple. You're just going to run in, Mangle, Rake, Rip. On to the next one. Mangle, Rake, and you're going to Rip. On to the next one. Tiger's Fury for some energy, Mangle, Rake, Rip. Go back to the beginning target. You're going to refresh Rake. You're going to wait a little bit, try to give Rip some time. You're going to refresh Rip before you move on. Refresh Rake. And you're going to try to refresh Rip. There, it's up. On to the next one. Rake's about to come off. Put it back up. You're going to refresh Rip. As you can see in my recount, the damage is excellent. About twice as much as I'd have using Swipe on 3 targets.